G'day guys, thanks for joining me today. My name is Sam and today we're going to talk about Breach of Peace. Breach of Peace is Daniel Greene's debut novella. It follows three main characters, Khlid, Chapman and Sam, on a pretty classic murder mystery investigation. The book opens with a very grim, dark and grisly murder scene. So big trigger warning there. If you are sensitive to pretty gory written scenes, this is definitely something that may affect you. You can probably skip through a certain amount of pages and be fine. Just check with someone before you read it if you really want to read it. But yeah, just a trigger warning there if you are affected by those sorts of things. This book may not be for you. The opening scene sets the tone really well for what you're going to see. The introducing murder scene is very straight down the line, murder mystery, trying to find out who, what, when, where, why. It grabbed my attention straight from the start, but I am also an absolute sucker for those types of things. So for me, it made a lot of sense, but I know for a lot of you, if murder mysteries with police and detectives and that sort of thing is not your thing, again, this book may not be of interest to you. This book is tiny. My copy is 134 pages. And so one of Daniel's biggest challenges in this novel is trying to build a world, social structures, religious structures, plot, characters, character development, and the overall plot itself into such a seriously small space of time while still moving the story forward. Being his debut piece of writing and being self-published, I thought the novella idea was a really smart idea. But I thought, being that we all make mistakes very early on in new adventures, this was a fantastic way for him to test out certain things, see what people liked, see what people didn't like. And we all know that doing something for the first time is so incredibly difficult and you go through such a learning curve. And so instead of throwing himself into the deepest of deep ends and trying to write a massive epic fantasy, he got to test a lot of these things out in a very small way. Daniel's prose is really straightforward in this novella. There are some clunky moments and some things that you will get stuck on. If you're really sensitive to prose, this may be quite a struggle for you to get through. Being so short definitely impacts a lot of things around this book, and that includes the amount of space and time that Daniel has to world build and develop his characters. And I think for me, the world building itself has such an interesting premise in the religion and other aspects surrounding that, without getting too far deep and without giving away too many spoilers. I wanted more, and that can be a really good thing, or it can make people frustrated. Personally, I think a lot of people's enjoyment of this book will come down to whether you trust Daniel as a writer or not. I know that's a funny thing to say when we're talking about someone's first piece of writing, but if you can go into this novella thinking about it as a little short crumb in a smorgasbord of, hopefully a smorgasbord of writing to come, then I think you'll have a much greater sense of enjoyment around the book. If you go into this expecting a well fleshed out, self-contained fantasy story, you're probably going to finish it quite disappointed. It is only 134 pages in my copy, and that is with quite large text. I think I saw the Kindle version is maybe even under 100. So that should give you some idea of, one, it's if you want a really small read, great. And if you want a taste of Daniel's writing, it is a fantastic way to do that. But it's not the way of kings. I certainly, when I picked up this book, hoped for something a little bit more self-contained, something that was a little bit more rounded, but it left me with enough that I'm excited to pick up the next book in the series. Daniel has recently announced that he's going to put multiple books together to create the next one. So it's not so much of a little taste test novella, but more of a fully fleshed out story. And I think that's a fantastic idea now that he's run through testing out this first novella idea. Time of the release, there was a lot of noise and there's a lot of review comments around authorial intent. In this novel, the police are essentially a religion unto themselves and they have a lot of power. When this book was released, it was around the time where police brutality and police abuse was at the forefront of American politics, media, and at the forefront of a lot of people's minds and worries. And a lot of people took aspects of this book to think that Daniel was agreeing with certain things that were happening. You'll have to read the book to kind of get more of an idea of that, or read the reviews, either way. But I think it's important to remember that authors can put things into their books without having to necessarily believe in them. I am sure that Stephen King and some of the really twisted things he writes about doesn't necessarily believe in them, the same as I'm sure Joe Abercrombie doesn't necessarily believe in torture and other really gnarly things that he writes about. And so it's important, if you're reading this book and you're sensitive to those sorts of things, important to keep in mind authorial intent. Daniel did do a video about it, so if you want more of his explanation on that, I'm sure you can go and check out that video. So to conclude this review, if you haven't picked up Breach of Peace yet, I personally would almost wait for Daniel to release the second book. I think this novella is a well done crumb or taste tester into what is a potential for him to release later on down the road. I think once the second book, especially now that it's longer, is released, you will have a much better idea of whether it is a storyline, a novel, a writing style for you. I think this alone probably doesn't give you enough to be able to make a fully formed opinion on that. It makes it a really hard book review to do with a lot of depth without giving away too many spoilers, because it is honestly such a small crumb. I like the premise of the police force being this religious, almost a religious body, and I think it's a really great thing to talk about and to start up conversations around where people sit on that, as long as you don't take certain aspects to think that Daniel believes wholeheartedly in them. I think that's one of the most fantastic things about novels, is we can write from different aspects and point of views to really flesh them out and experience them without them being a real world issue. So all in all, if you're picking up this novella expecting The Name of the Wind, one, you have really high expectations, and two, you will be disappointed. This is more a taste test, crumb introduction into the world that Daniel hopes to build. On its own, it's really hard to give a rating to, because I almost feel like it's listening to 10 seconds of a song. You can't fully give an idea of the whole thing, but I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10 on its own. But it's important to point out that I think, it could slide lower or higher depending on what Daniel does with this second book. I think he's got the talent and the knowledge to pull off increasing this book's rating just through the context of the second book, but there is also a chance that it could slide down the rating. So all in all, if you've read this book, please let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, subscribe, do all those fun things, and I will see you on our next book review. Cheers.